Why, thank you, Paige, and hello, everyone. Today's curriculum was inspired by a National Manager of the Year finalist who appreciated our reserve budget webinars, but noted a blind spot in our curriculum. Boards and managers need help making reserve-related decisions all throughout the year, not just at budget time. Financial success comes from a combination of a good budget and wise decisions that are made on a daily and weekly basis throughout the year. So thank you, Mary Arnold from Real Manage. As Paige mentioned, this is a live presentation and everyone's been muted to keep the background noise to a minimum. To improve everyone's learning experience, I want to point out a few controls that appear on your screen. Every once in a while, I'll ask for your feedback so you can connect with me and all the other attendees all across the country. And the way to respond is to raise your hand by clicking on the hands raised icon that appears in your control panel that looks like the one that you see on the screen. So as I welcome you to today's program, give me a hands raised if you're in a room watching this webinar with at least one other person. So if you're in a group setting. Excellent. Alexander, Beth, Calvin, Carlos, wow, Cindy, Courtney, Chelsea. I gotta stop, it's gonna take all day. Thank you all for groups, and I've just put hands down. How about hands raised for anyone attending from home? Great, nice, healthy number of you. It's a wonderful resource to be able to do this from home. Okay, I put hands down. And follow up, anyone still in their pajamas? Oh, gee, I should have looked to see. Hopefully these are the same people who are attending from home. Well, thank you all. I put hands down. And now for a quick announcement before we get going. As Paige indicated, this course is approved for CE credit through CAMICB, and that by definition is an international certification board. And in addition, this is the first program that we've done approved for 1 hour of CE credit through the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation for licensed CAMs. And want to thank you all for joining us today, for your interest in continuing education credits, for continuing to press us to offer more and more features for you. Well, I hope you have some paper and are prepared to take notes, but for your peace of mind, we are recording today's session. We'll also have an outline of today's program for everyone who fills out a short survey at the end of today's program. Today's registration sets another Association Reserves record, so thank you to everyone who keeps making suggestions how we can increase the value of our curriculum or our presentation. So that outline will be a great resource for you to refer to in the future. In addition to the curriculum, it'll include our Q&A discussion and a link to the webinar recording. If you came with a question, or if at any time you have a question that arose due to something I've said, just type it in the dialog box in your control panel. It appears similar to the one you see on screen. Paige is going to be monitoring your questions throughout the session today and select from those at the end during our Q&A time. We do have a full 45 minutes worth of curriculum. Paige and I were actually discussing in advance, do we roll out another reserve study roadmap that's just time that we handle questions. So just to let you know, submit a question. We'll either deal with those in writing or we may roll over and do an entirely new program as a follow-up. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for joining us today. And at this point in time, why don't you give me a hands raised if you're ready for me to start today's curriculum? Hands raised if you are good to go. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. And we jump in. A roadmap to success with reserves begins with a successful strategy. Success comes from a board committed to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association. I learned that 30 years ago. And that maximizes property values and builds a strong community. A reserve study helps the board meet that objective, pointing out which projects are coming, how big they'll be, and how to prepare financially. Success comes from collecting the right amount of money, spending it appropriately, and then adjusting that plan annually. And that again brings us to today's curriculum, working with the reserves decisions throughout the course of the year. A winning strategy means using words and phrases that give you the upper hand. In your discussion about reserves, that always means speaking about reserves in present tense terms. Reserve contributions are for the present. Reserves are not for the future. They're not for a slush fund. They're not for a rainy day. They're not for good idea projects. Reserves offset the ongoing daily, weekly, monthly deterioration at the association. The expenses, as you know, are scattered irregularly through the years, but the cost of deterioration is as steady and real as any other bill at the association. Anytime the conversation strays towards the future, bring it back. Emphasize that deterioration is real, it's now, and the cost is not going away. Give me a hands raised if this is a new concept for the boards that you work with. The reserves are totally a current present tense issue. Great. Okay, thank you very much. Hands down. This is so important. If it's in the future, if reserves are characterized as something in the future, it can be someone else's problem. But if it's a real bill that needs to be paid, it's much harder for the board to ignore. And keep the conversation simple. Reserve expenses are inevitable. Again, that ongoing cost of deterioration. That 20-year roof didn't fail overnight. Didn't fail in a surprising way. It failed gradually in plain sight over the last 20 years. And the board's responsible to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association. It won't be the last time I say that. And if the board delays and deferred maintenance sets in, those same expenses are going to grow. And most of those well-intended delays only end up costing homeowners more money. So protect your homeowners, do the right thing at the right time. So keep the board's eye on the ball. It's their job to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association, running the association in a financially sound and sustainable manner. And that means that guessing or inaction is irresponsible. Time marches on. Deterioration marches on. Waiting just gets the association further behind. Actions and expenditures are necessary. Inaction actually exposes the board to increased litigation risk because they lose their protection from the business judgment rule when they fail to act in the best interests of the needs of the association, and especially if they do so without or after ignoring the recommendation in a reserve study. So their E&O insurance can also not apply to them. If your boards say, we can't afford adequate reserve contributions, that's a lousy excuse from the people who have the power and responsibility to set the budget. Setting a responsible budget is their job. Well, it starts with getting a reserve study, either for the first time or getting it updated. A reserve study helps the association avoid surprises. It reduces costs by minimizing those expensive deferred maintenance scope of work overruns. It reduces liability, as I just indicated, and it maximizes property values due to the property looking good and well maintained, keeping the association in compliance with state laws. And remember, there's that intangible benefit of keeping the owners informed, reassuring them that the board has a plan to care for the needs of the association without fear of special assessment. So it avoids the rumor mill and the wondering and the problems that come up, like surprises, the higher expenses that I indicated that just burden the association, the uninsured liability, and what we call the Ds. And those Ds are things like disappointment with how the property looks, discouragement that we've got no money to do things, dysfunction is the inaction, deterioration is sets in when there's no money and no action, declining home values, poor curb appeal, and rumors of what are we going to do, it's going to take a special assessment, and the distrust that owners are aware or believe, and perception is reality, that the board's not taking care of the property. So remember, though, that complying with the law is really not the point. You don't prepare a reserve study in the 25 or so states that require reserve studies or reserve study disclosures to comply with the law. Reserve studies fundamentally help the board make informed decisions how to responsibly run their multi-million-dollar not-for-profit real estate corporation. So Let's talk about boards. Managers are the agent for the boards. We've got board members here today. We have other industry professionals. The boards make the decisions, but I'm going to talk to the outsiders here. How do you encourage or influence the board towards wise choices? Well, we all know the theory. The theory is that the boards are supposed to maintain, protect, and enhance the assets of the association. But the reality is usually quite different from that. Most boards stereotypically act like their job is to keep assessments low. And give me a hands raised if that's a pretty good stereotype. Boards just wanting to keep assessments low. Good, okay. We deal with the same clients. These boards are living in a mindset of limitations. They're not believing and operating fundamentally on the basis of their responsibilities. So you need to remind them of their job. Help them keep their eye on the ball, their responsibilities. And let me give you a new tool that doing the right thing, managing the responsibilities, is actually in their financial best interests. You can help them make a bunch of money. Now, I'm not talking about paying board members, but let me show you this. In a study we finished earlier this year, among comparable associations in a similar tight geographic area, over 100 different associations that we prepared reserve studies for, what we found was that home prices on a dollar per square foot basis were 12.6% higher in associations with a well-funded reserves, 70% funded or higher. And that means that running the association in a fiscally responsible manner provides a strong return on home values. A few dollars per more in reserve contributions and the reflection of those higher reserve contributions and monthly assessments, that maximizes curb appeal and returns, here's the key word, thousands of dollars to each owner in maximized home values. So a roadmap for success starts off with a strategy of focusing on a simple message of responsibly budgeting to offset ongoing deterioration. Keep it current, keep it present tense. And managing that responsibility pays off handsomely with maximized home values. Okay, let's talk about reserve studies. The document itself, putting it into practice, tips to help you save time and encourage the board to make the appropriate wise financial decisions. The things I'm going to talk about today are not just Robert or not just association reserves, but they come from National Reserve Study Standards, which went into place back in 1998. Have your boards understand that there are three types of reserve studies: a full reserve study and two update products, a with site visit update and a no site visit update. So reserve studies come in three flavors. A full reserve study typically only needs to be done once. So the vast majority of reserve studies performed across the United States are the less expensive with site visit and no site visit updates. Most with site visit updates are done every 3 to 5 years, and that's sometimes influenced by the local state law interval requirements. No site visit updates are commonly done in the in-between years. Remember, both of these update products are much less expensive than that first full reserve study engagement. So board members don't need to just fear the cost. And there's three parts to every reserve study, whether it's a first-time full reserve study or one of the updates. And each part has an application to you and the decisions the association makes throughout the year. The first part of the reserve study is the component list, where you identify or where the association's major repair or replacement projects are identified. So the question is, which are the right ones? Well, by definition, the right ones meet the National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test. Reserve study providers use this test, and you should be familiar with it also. To be funded through reserves, a project needs to be, and look at it on screen, top left, a common area maintenance responsibility. It needs to have a limited useful life, meaning not permanent, predictable remaining useful life, meaning not random, and above a minimum threshold cost, so above board member and manager signature authority for the little things you do on an ongoing basis. These are the projects associations fund with reserves. Most of your reserve decisions throughout the year will be these type of spending choices. So when do you spend reserve dollars? Do you spend it when the project appears in the reserve study, when the remaining useful life hits 0, when one of those projects breaks? Can you wait? What about maintenance versus replace? Give me a hands raised if those are some of the questions you face throughout the year. Good, good, good. Okay, again, we're dealing with the same clients. Okay, I put hands down. Please understand, there are generally 5 ways a component can fail. There's inconsequential failures like a pool heater. Worst that happens is the pool just cools down for a couple days, you get a new one, and in a couple days it's back to being warm. There's reevaluate, like a wobbly perimeter fence or maybe a roof that is starting to look a little old. There's obsolescence, which are things like outdated furniture in a lobby or old exercise equipment in a rec room. Whoops. And protection projects, like painting your wood trim or sealing your asphalt or decks, things that you need to do to prevent a more significant expense. And there's catastrophic projects, failures to entry systems. My favorite is a hot water system, fire alarms, elevator function, plumbing projects. What I want you to understand is that this guides your project timing decisions. Execute or wait. Do it now or delay. Bottom line is don't delay any red, protection, or catastrophic projects. It's just not worth it. For example, this is a protection project that was delayed. It was an inexpensive asphalt seal project that got left unchecked, and that deterioration led to an expensive remove and replace project, which is about 10 times the cost of the seal project that got delayed. And this is a similar protection project, metalwork that went unpainted because the board wanted to save a few dollars, but that meant that the $8 a lineal foot repaint project became a $50 a lineal foot repair project. And you can see in the picture, it still needs to be painted. And remember those 4 reserve rules? Deterioration is inevitable. It just keeps on coming. You can't stop it. And look at this roof picture. It was a reevaluate project. It hovered at a year left for a few years as we watched it closely until both our firm and the roofer said the time is now. The remaining useful life is 0. But the board felt lucky and they delayed, and those delays in replacing the roof led to significant water intrusion expenses, disruption to the owners, and significant roof replacement cost overruns due to the roofer having to work on an emergency basis. And of course, the plastics are not cheap either. 1 year too late, got very expensive and very disruptive. Okay, reserve component list. This is what a normal reserve component list looks like according to National Reserve Study standards. Project description, useful life and remaining useful life in years, and the current cost. Remember, these were all selected by that National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test. So let's look a little bit closer. They've got a pool, and the second line you can see is pool resurface. This is where it starts to get a little interesting. You get a call from the board that the pool heater has failed. It's going to be about $3,000 or $4,000, but it doesn't appear as a component. What do? Can you spend the dollars from reserves? So let's take a moment and think. The board about 10 years ago had a heater installed to increase the usage of the pool, but the heater never made it into the reserve study. So give me a hands up for spend the money from reserves. Okay, looks like about a quarter. Hands down, spend the money from operating. Not listed in the reserve study. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a third, okay? Let me give you some guidance how to make this decision. First off, double check the reserve study. Look a little bit deeper. Maybe it is called pool equipment or pool system. And if you don't find it and you think you should, the asterisk means call your reserve study provider. They're part of your team. Include them. And you and your reserve study provider will probably refer to the 4-part test. Remember, reserve projects are defined by the 4-part test, not the reserve component list. So in your chat with the reserve study provider, if it passes the 4-part test, it's a legitimate reserve expense, so spend the dollars from reserves. Maybe they didn't know, maybe it was installed behind some bushes or behind a fence. Reserve providers are imperfect. The bottom line is, if it's a reserve component according to the 4-part test, it's a legitimate expenditure from reserves. So make a note and remind your reserve study provider at your next update to add the pool heater. That's how you get to make your reserve study better and better through the years. And that's how you make a decision on a missing project. Okay, suppose a project costs more or less than anticipated. I'm going to recommend perform the project. Remember, that's the board's primary responsibility to take care of the association, help them achieve that primary goal. Figure that the reserve funds will be reallocated in the next update. In a reserve study well done, some projects will come in under budget, some will come in over budget. And here's a key point. If it's a major repair that falls short of replacement, so it's significantly less than a full replace cost, but if it's significant enough to change the remaining useful life, then spend the dollars from reserves and adjust the remaining useful life in the next update. So if it affects the reserve study, if that maintenance project can extend the remaining useful life, that's how you make the maintenance versus reserves decision point, if it affects and changes the reserve study. Okay, remember the 4 reserve rules. Their asterisk that I show on the screen is because in some states there's some requirements to separate reserves between components, not spending fence dollars on roof projects and vice versa. So check with your reserve study provider, but that again is usually handled just by interfund transfer, reallocating funds in the next reserve study update. Not a big deal. The bottom line, help the board fulfill their responsibility. Expenses happen. It's their responsibility to run the affairs of the association. Delaying major projects regularly gets expensive, and the homeowners get stuck with the bill. Remember again those 4 reserve rules. So don't drag your feet and make sure the project gets done, and you'll figure out the accounting later. Okay, what about capital improvements? The key distinction is if the project or asset exists. If it's a natural upgrade to an existing project, so if it was a reserve project and the upgrade is to a new material technology, it's still a reserve project. But adding an entirely new asset, like a dock or a tennis court where one did not previously exist, that's a capital improvement and not a legitimate use of reserve funds. Remember earlier I said reserves are for ongoing deterioration, not for great ideas. Well, it might be a great idea. $500,000 in reserves may look tempting, but that's not a legitimate reserve expense. If the asset or project exists is the key distinction. Remember that reserves offset, I'm going to say it over and over again, offset ongoing deterioration of existing assets. They're not a slush fund to buy new things for the association. Now, if you have specific questions on this or any of the other examples I just ran through, by all means jot them down, and I'll get to those either at the end or in the outline. Turn the corner, let's talk about money in the reserve fund. Does the board have enough to maintain and replace the common areas? How much can you overspend without getting real itchy and nervous? And how much is generally enough? How much is the right amount? Well, often the numbers seem big, and that is true. Everything's expensive, and reserve projects by nature take years of financial preparation. So another terminology issue to use with your boards is to discuss reserve fund size in terms of percent funded. Dollars can sound big, but they're only meaningful when compared to the needs of the association. $500,000 can sound like a big number until you realize for this association, it's going to cost $1.2 million for the roof, and so $500,000 means they only have their percent funded is a small number. So think about the icon on the left. the gentleman on the seesaw where you're comparing the needs of the association versus cash in the bank. That's percent funded. Percent funded will help you know if you have enough and if you have some margin for those unanticipated projects. And remember that the cost of deterioration is ongoing. Percent funded reveals if ongoing reserve contributions have kept pace with that ongoing deterioration. That ongoing deterioration is the yellow pace line, and your contributions are trying to keep up. And if they haven't, then you're falling behind. Okay, this is the cross-section of percent funded of associations across the country. The weak associations are in the red on the left, and the strong associations are in the green on the right. You might be surprised that so many associations are in the fair and strong range. That's because it's the red zone projects, associations that get all the news. The red associations are the ones with the special assessments, deferred maintenance, turmoil, long board meetings, and as I said earlier, the D's, dysfunction, discouragement, you know what I said. The green ones on the right are the responsible associations. Those are the easy ones to manage because they have the dollars to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association. They're on top of things. They are the ones who are running the association, caring for the association because they understand their responsibility. And this is why percent funded matters. This is the chart that shows you can predict special assessments at most associations. You can see them coming years in advance. Special assessments are common when the association is in the 0 to 30% funded red zone on the left. Special assessments are uncommon in the yellow fair zone, and they're very rare, as you would expect, over in the green zone on the right. Okay, let's talk about the funding plan. Actually putting money into reserves. How much does it take on an ongoing basis to make those contributions? What's normal? Is there a normal? How does the board fulfill their responsibility? Well, before talking about how much, you need to first understand your talking points about why. Budgeted contributions are how everyone pays their fair share of steady, predictable, ongoing deterioration, so the funds exist when they're needed. If you take care of today, the future takes care of itself. So this is how associations avoid unfair special assessments and expensive deferred maintenance with budgeted contributions. And this is all part of the roadmap to success. Again, it's not for the future. Offsets, the contributions offset ongoing deterioration. Everyone pays their fair share, projects get done on time, deferred maintenance and cost overruns are eliminated, and curb appeal and property values are maximized. All good things. All right, well, how much is typical? Well, here's a cross-section profile among, again, all associations across the country. And we find this is consistent no matter how we slice the data. High-rise, mid-rise, townhomes, planned communities, old or new, remember deterioration is ongoing. Reserve projects are expensive. They require reserve funds. They require a lot of reserve funds. You can see that adequate reserve contributions stretch kind of from the 15 to 40% range, with most associations needing to set aside about 25% of their budget towards reserves. And as such, this might be the typical association's single largest budget line item. It's a big deal, and it's important to get right. But remember, there's some significant benefits to doing it well and significant consequences to getting it wrong. And here's another way to visualize it. 15 to 40% is typical, remember, but 25% is a good guess to get you in the right ballpark. It's a big chunk of the total budget, but it's the board's job. It's the board's job to protect, maintain, and enhance the assets of the association, and fundamentally it costs money. Okay, I expect many of your boards are going to say we can't afford that. And let me reach over to my mouse and click to see, give me a hands raised if you think your boards are just going to roll over and say 25%, we can't afford that. Hands raised if that sounds like a lot. Great. Okay. Very normal. Okay, I put hands down. That's to be expected if they've been under-reserving for years, skating on that thin ice of having inadequate reserves to do the necessary projects. But you guys all recognize the icon on the screen. What is that? If I could hear your audio, I'd hear you saying Starbucks. Adequate reserve contributions are affordable. For the typical condominium association, adequate reserve contributions are about $3 to $5 a day. That's about the size of an average coffee drink. So don't let any board tell you they can't afford it. They can. Anyone who can afford a coffee drink can afford reserve contributions. So don't buy into that argument that they can't afford it. Remember the 4 reserve rules? Homeowners always get stuck paying the bill. Well, foolish boards make it expensive for the owners. Here's another way to see it. To give owners the smallest bill, the board should be paying for reserve projects with ongoing budgeted contributions. Here's how 3 different ways to pay for a 15-year roof that costs $250,000. If the board sets budgeted contributions over the years and collects 1% interest from the bank, the homeowners only need to contribute about $232,000 over those 15 years. The bank kicks in the rest. If you special assess at the last minute, of course, it's going to be $250,000. If the board says, we can't do a special assessment, let's take out a loan. That's the easy way. Well, it may be the easy way after you do all the paperwork, but it's also the expensive way because a loan's going to cost about $320,000 over the course of a typical 7-year loan. And if you do the math, that's about $90,000 more that the homeowners are going to have to pay for the same roof than if they would have paid along the way. Okay? Budgeted contributions are the least expensive way to pay for inevitable reserve expenses. And I'm going to dive into a small tangent off the roadmap for success, take you off on a side road, but I want to give you a talking point. Some of you are going to face a treasurer or board member talking about their preference for a particular method of calculating reserve contributions, straight line or cash flow. It should not be a big deal. It's almost like choosing a vehicle nowadays. You can choose one that gets you from here to there using gasoline, diesel, batteries, or some kind of a hybrid. Both straight line and cash flow have their flaws, and both require some compensating techniques. Neither is perfect in its technical original format, and both fund exactly the same projects defined by the 4-part test. So don't get too sideways distracted by that. In fact, if you do have someone who's bothered about that, we've got resources on our website. If you can't find it, email me. And what about associations that still are having a hard time facing that steep increase for adequate reserve contributions, trying to get up to the 25%-ish range? Well, fortunately, in most cases, you can design a multi-year solution. We call it the $10 solution. Talk them into raising their reserve contributions by $10 a month this year per homeowner, and then plan on talking them into another $10 per month increase the following year. And in most cases, in just 2 to 5 years, most associations will be making adequate reserve contributions. Just a few adjustments spread over a few years. Give me a hands raised if this sounds doable. The $10 solution. A little bit this year, a little bit next year, okay? For so many of you with a December 31st fiscal year end or clients with December 31st fiscal year ends, this may be your ace up your sleeve to try to get them moving in the right direction. Okay, let's close out this Roadmap for Success webinar by talking about your strategy. How do you read a reserve study quickly? Well, look for the fiscal year for which it was prepared. Reserve studies get old and outdated pretty quick. Look for the type. You know now there's 3 types: full with site visit update and no site visit update. The component list, hopefully based on that National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test. And the evaluation of reserve fund strength, measured by percent funded, is the most effective way to gain understanding. And a multi-year funding plan. And if you want to, divide it out by per owner per month. And for a condominium, see how that compares to a cup of coffee. That's pretty much it. So if the reserve study is new, what do you distribute to the owners? Well, executive summary in general, its purpose is to be distributed to all the owners, leaving the complete reserve study for just those that specifically request it. And I'm not sure of most of your particular policy, your association, your management company, but this is the type of document, a full, I should say full, a complete reserve study, the entire reserve study. Typically, boards and management companies charge to reproduce and provide that kind of a document to the owners. And for most associations on a monthly basis, what do you do with those reserve contributions? Do you split it out? Well, I'm going to recommend, number one, transfer it to your reserve fund. But how do you account for it? For most associations, just deposit it in the reserve fund and let it be. Those funds are going to get spent as needed. Now, as you know, on legitimate reserve projects, and my recommendation, you can save a lot of time by skipping the step of dividing it up into all those different budget line items each month. You know they're just going to get rebalanced and redistributed in the next year's reserve study update anyway. So I don't see a lot of value in that. How do you know if you're reaching success? You can measure success by lack of special assessments, projects getting done on time, projects not getting done with borrowed operating funds, knowing where to spend the funds, percent funded above 70%, reserve projects that pass the 4-part test, and from the ongoing operating budget standing on its own, not needing to borrow back from reserves. And how to have success in that annual budgeting process? Well, use fresh information. We see so often boards trying to make decisions using an old reserve study that eventually they have us update. Some states require a pattern of WISide visit updates every 3 to 5 years, and that's actually a pretty good standard. Reserves are one of the association's largest budget items. 25% is a big number, and I'd argue it's worthy of revisiting annually for adjustments. The proof is that associations who update the reserve study annually reduce their special assessment risk by about 30%. That's a big number. And those updates are not expensive. The WISide visit updates and the no-side visit updates are, as I said earlier, significantly less expensive than the full reserve studies. Now you know what to do, but suppose you've still got a stubborn board or you're a minority on your board. Protect yourself. Hopefully you've done your best, reminding the board it's their obligation, their responsibility. Have them live in the world of responsibilities, not limitations. Describe reserves with every conversation in present tense terms, offsetting ongoing deterioration. Keep them as real as any other bill that the association pays, and make sure they're spending reserves appropriately from reserves, not projects that don't pass the 4-part test. And as necessary, protect yourself. Get your recommendations or objections in the official meeting minutes, and go home and get a good rest while those dissenting board members move the association closer to special assessments and declining property values. If you're a standalone homeowner and you see your association careening off the tracks, you may want to start setting up your own little reserve fund so when the special assessment happens, you're ready. So with respect to reserves, a roadmap for success boils down to collecting what's necessary, spending it wisely, and adjusting the plan regularly. It's really not complicated. And I want to leave you with a reminder that our website, reservestudy.com, has a deep library of resources, both written and video. It's a great place to find information. And if you can't find it, reach out to Paige or myself, and we'll point out an article or recorded webinar that'll answer any of your questions or one by one of your board members out there. We made it easy to reach out and get a proposal if you're in need of an updated reserve study, and we'd love to help you with that. Just click the request a proposal icon. And as I said earlier, this is record attendance today. I believe we struck a real nerve, so spread the word. Have other people join our email list so they can get the inside track. We want to build successful communities across the country. And that's the end of my prepared curriculum for today. So at this time, we'll transition to a brief Q&A time, and I'll hand the microphone over to Paige, get a drink of water, and let her serve as our MC. Paige.